Good evening, ladies as well as gentlemen. Papa Boris here, back with another one of my favorite games from my childhood. This game really has everything a little boy could possibly want in a great game of chess. An epic sacrifice, a dazzling mating combination, and it's really short. Of all the decisive games played among strong chess players throughout history, this is one of the shortest of the most famous games. And the players were both very strong. Richard Reti, playing the white pieces, made a lot of contributions to opening theory. He was, in addition to being a great player, a very prolific chess writer. And the same could be said of Savielly Tartakower. He also was a great player and a prolific chess writer, and both of them made a lot of contributions to opening theory. The two of them and Aaron Nimzovich contributed to the hypermodern school of thought, which changed a lot of the ways that people played chess openings. Reti actually has the Reti opening named after him, which is knight to f3. Yeah, the first move of the game is named after him, so you know this guy is a boss. And Tartakower also had an opening on the first move that he designed. This was b4, the orangutan opening. Now that one's not super great, but people do still play the Reti opening today. Tartakower, on the black side here, was also a very witty player. He had a lot of aphorisms, so if you've ever heard the phrase, "no one ever won by resigning," that was him. And my personal favorite quotation of his is, "The winner is the player who made the second to last mistake." Now, I'm not going to say who won the game, so we'll let the chess speak for itself on this one. Reti opened up with e4, and Tartakower replied with c6, the Caro-Kann defense. Now, a lot of players don't like this defense because it does have a reputation for being very solid, very stable, and leading to, boring, stodgy games. But as this game shows, if one side or the other doesn't know what they're doing, then the game can still end in a pretty dramatic fashion. Reti continued with d4, d5, the standard Caro-Kann, and after knight to c3, Tartakower decided to exchange in the center, relieving the tension and allowing white to get this nice centralized knight on e4. This is a pretty equal position, but of course, as in most openings, white does have a little bit of an edge with this nice centralized piece in this case. Tartakower continued with knight to f6, challenging that knight in the center, and more usual, perhaps, is to exchange knights here. And after e takes f6, the game continues and it's fine for both sides. But Reti decided to pursue a more interesting line of attack. He played queen to d3. Now, if you've played any chess, you know the rule of thumb that you should not develop your queen before you've developed your other pieces. So Reti, on the fifth move of the game, already violates that rule because there's 3 minor pieces still undeveloped and the king's not castled yet. But, of course, as is always the case with rules of thumb, they can be broken. And what Reti noticed is that after knight takes e4, queen takes e4, this centralized queen cannot be kicked all that easily. So normally the reason why it's bad to have a queen developed early is that your opponent can make moves to develop and attack your queen at the same time. So just for example, let's just suppose black had a knight here still on g8, then he could play knight to f6, which would develop the knight, and attack white's queen. So the queen would have to move, and white would have to spend a move moving his queen instead of developing his pieces. That's generally why it's bad to develop your queen early. But here the queen's kind of immune from any sort of attack. I mean, the only real attacking move here is f5, which is horrible because it, moves the f-pawn, makes the black king a little bit unsafe. It might potentially result in a backwards e-pawn. That would be a liability. It's a really weakening move, and it doesn't develop a piece. It pushes a pawn, so black doesn't gain anything by attacking the white queen with this. And perhaps because of these considerations... Oh, I should also mention one more thing. There's no way to exploit this, by the way. Like, you can't play, bishop to f5 or something and try to pin the knight to the queen, because then white can actually just take the knight with check, and after the knight is recaptured, gobble up a piece, and now white's a piece up. So, perhaps because Tartakower didn't like letting white have the central queen, he decided to play e5. And this begins one of my favorite things in chess. Normally, when there's a game with a crazy combination, there's the one person who masterminded it all, and the other person who just didn't see it coming. But what I like to see is a situation like this, in which the two players clearly are in a battle of the brains. Both players think that they have outwitted the other. Both players believe that they have seen one move ahead. But of course, one of them is right, and the other one's about to get pummeled horribly. And in this case, black offers a pawn. This is a pawn sacrifice here. And so when Richard Reti takes the pawn, he's basically saying to Tartakower, I don't believe you got jack for that pawn. And Tartakower's saying, oh boy, you about to get jacked. So let's see which one of them was right. Tartakower played queen to a5 check. And after Richard Reti made the move bishop to d2, a natural reply because it develops a piece, attacks the queen, and stops the check all in one move, Tartakower played queen takes e5, winning back his pawn. And this move not only wins back the pawn, but it also pins the white knight to the white king, and this is a little bit of an awkward situation for white. If you try to defend the knight with something like f3, then black can take the knight, and after everything is exchanged, notice the pawn structure for both sides. This is something that you can look at as you try to become a better chess player. Black has two pawn islands. There's a pawn chain over here, and there's a pawn chain over here. Whereas white has three. There's the two pawns here, the three pawns here, and then this isolated pawn in the center. This is a weakness for white. It's likely that black will eventually be able to win that pawn or extract some other price from white if white is intent on keeping it. So that was Tartakower's master plan, that after white protected the knight, he would have an endgame, Tartakower would, with a slight advantage in the form of an isolated pawn for white. However, he missed Reti's next move, which was queenside castle. And after white castled queenside, suddenly white's got black with his pants down. Because now the king is out of the way, so the knight's no longer pinned, and on top of that, now the black queen's looking a little bit silly on the same file as the black king. And so white here is actually threatening to just move the rook here and pin the queen. So black can't take the knight like this. This is actually not winning a piece. This is womp womp losing the queen. At this point, black would have no better option than to take the rook. And when the smoke is all cleared, black has a rook and a knight for a queen. A queen is worth more than a rook and a knight, so white is up material, black has zero compensation, and white is just going to win the game. So Tartakower decided another course of action. The best option probably would have been to just accept that he's in a worse position and play bishop to e7. This disrupts the connection from the queen to the king, so, after white tries something like, say, rook to e1, black can just ignore this and castle, and everything's fine. If white takes the knight, black takes the knight, and white has the advantage here, but it's not the end of the world either. However, Tartakower decided another line of attack. He, I guess, just wanted to keep things sharp, and he played knight takes e4. So the idea here is that if white plays rook to e1, a very natural move, pinning the knight to the queen to the king, black can do something like bishop to f5, and white doesn't really want to play f3 here. This blocks his knight from developing. So after something like g4 to displace this black bishop, black could tuck the bishop to e6, white could take back the knight on e4, and then the black queen can drop back to c7. So now white got his piece back, material is equal, white is better developed and has a better position, but it's a playable game. This is what Tartakower must have been counting on when he played knight to e4, the natural rook to e1, making this pin. Unfortunately, in this game, Tartakower made both the second to last and the last mistake because he completely missed Richard Reti's next move, queen to motherfucking d8 check. This is, of course, the most epic sacrifice you can ever have in a chess game. White isn't even giving up a queen for a pawn. White is just straight up giving up a queen for nothing. It doesn't get more epic than that. Black has only one move, king takes d8. And now white plays the amazing bishop to g5 double check. Now, in a double check, two pieces are attacking one king. And that means that the king has to move. So, it doesn't matter in this case that the white bishop is attacked by two pieces because you can't take this bishop, since then the rook would still be attacking the king. And you can't, block the rook because then the bishop would still be attacking the king. So the king has to move. Normally, when you sacrifice a queen, you don't give your opponent any options, but here Richard Reti gave his opponent two generous options for where to move the king, to e8 or to c7. If the king goes to e8, then we have rook to d8 checkmate. This is a very Morphy-esque checkmate, as we saw in another game. Tartakower elected to play king to c7, which allows for bishop to d8 checkmate. And the final irony of this game is that the c6 pawn, which was the hallmark of the Caro-Kann defense, the defense that's supposed to be rock solid and super safe, is blocking the king from moving away from the check, thus resulting in a spectacular loss for black. Well, folks, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please like and or subscribe, and I'll see you again soon. Take care.